What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Fantasy Football 201. It is now officially the end of the 2023 regular season. Half the league is now done for the season and playing no more games, so we're going to start looking forward to 2024's fantasy football season. So, in this video, I'm going to talk about the first four teams that are going to be drafting in the NFL draft in 2024, provided there's not going to be any more trades, and continue to talk about teams from there based on needs in the draft and looking at the 2024 fantasy football season. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to my channel and check out my other content listed below in the description. So for this video, we're going to be talking about the first four teams in the NFL draft: Chicago, Washington, Arizona, and New England. So we're going to be looking at, for the next couple weeks, we're going to be looking at groups of teams in terms of what their needs are. I'm starting with these four teams in particular because they are the teams that are most likely to influence the key positions of guys quarterbacks will be taken at the top, or a key wide receiver who I will get to in a little bit. You probably already know it's Marvin Harrison Jr. But as you can see in this picture here, this is the draft order for 2024. Again, provided there's no trades, this is where we're at right now based on teams that have finished. Carolina had the worst record, but as you're probably aware, they traded their first round pick this season to trade up to get Bryce Young. So we're talking about Chicago because Chicago right now is in position to take Caleb Williams, but they've got some questions about what they're going to do with their future at quarterback. So we're going to go through these four teams because these are the most likely to shake things up in terms of getting one of the three quarterbacks that are hyped up very high, or taking a key position player, Marvin Harrison Jr., that can be immediately contributing to fantasy football teams next year. We'll continue to group the teams later. I'll talk about that in a sec. But we will start at the quarterback position and go position by position on each team. So for this video, we're going to be going team by team with Chicago, Washington, New England, and Arizona, going through all the positions. But for the quarterbacks, I'm going to group them all together and talk about them all at once because it depends heavily on the draft and what they decide to do. So in this picture, I've got the 2024 mock draft from Tankathon. This is the projection of which players will be taken at this present time. As you can see, Caleb Williams projected to go to Chicago, Washington with the number 2 pick projected to take Drake May, New England projected to take Jaden Daniels, and then Arizona projected to take Marvin Harrison Jr. Then we'll talk about those teams coming up down the list later. But Chicago, Washington, and New England are all three teams that are very likely to take a quarterback. This is assuming at this time that all three of those teams are going to be taking a quarterback and that Arizona is going to be taking Marvin Harrison Jr., which is probably going to be a late first round, early second round pick is what I would guess based on the amount of hype that he's getting at this point in time and the immediate need for a receiver in Arizona. So these are all guys that could contribute right away and early. But we'll hone in on quarterback specifically. I first want to talk about Arizona. There is an off chance that they may decide to trade Kyler Murray and use this as an opportunity to reset given the amount of money that they owe him. However, based on the way he's played, especially over the last 3 weeks since his return from injury, I really doubt that they would honestly move on from him. He's former number 1 overall pick. He's had a lot of success with the team, but unfortunately the way the season started out with his injury and the overall needs of the roster, it would most likely be the best direction for this team to just try to make sure they're getting better at the other positions around Kyler Murray. They seem to be fine at quarterback, but they are a wild card because they do have the potential with the position that they're in the draft to potentially try to trade up or try to take a quarterback and use Kyler Murray as trade bait. Don't think it's going to happen, though. These other three teams are more likely to take quarterback. Justin Fields has played better for Chicago, and Justin Fields had a pretty good fantasy season, especially down the stretch. He was rated as the number 17 quarterback despite missing a good chunk of the season. But Justin Fields is a little underwhelming in terms of his passing ability. He's an excellent runner, and for fantasy football, this makes him a great asset to have, whether he's on the Chicago Bears or another team. But in real life, I have a hard time seeing the Chicago Bears necessarily looking at Justin Fields and feel that they have a better pure passer, pure quarterback than the guys that they can get in this draft. So he's likely to be traded, I would guess, and this would net them maybe a second-round pick. That seems to be the projection that most people have. But talking Justin Fields specifically, he's going to have an opportunity next year. And because of his rushing ability, he's going to be a good fantasy asset. I personally, if you're in dynasty leagues, would hold on any kind of trades with him because you don't know if he's going to maybe he could end up in a better situation. Maybe he could be traded somewhere to be a backup. Doubt that would happen. But I wouldn't be making any decisions necessarily right now on Justin Fields because it could go either way. Washington and New England, you're talking Sam Howell, Mac Jones, Bailey Zappi. Those guys are not going to be relevant in fantasy football next year. I would highly doubt any of them would have a starting job in the NFL next year. And more than likely, those two teams are going to be taking quarterbacks. And whether they take Drake May or they take Jaden Daniels or even Michael Penix, who's currently the number 8 quarterback, number 8 pick projected to go in the mock draft to Atlanta. He may come up the boards depending on what happens in the national championship game. There's a lot of outcomes that could happen. But the point is that Washington and New England are almost assuredly going to get a quarterback at this position in the draft. And it's going to really, whichever quarterback they take is really going to influence the offense. Jaden Daniels more of a dual threat quarterback. So immediately off the bat, I think he'd be a little better of a fantasy asset. I really do not like to rank rookies before they're even drafted to a team because I don't really know the situation that they're going to be on yet. But my initial hunch is that Jalen Daniels is going to be more of an immediate fantasy contributor than Drake May. Jaden Daniels also has a little more experience than Drake May, and because of that, may be able to grasp an offense quicker. Drake May need a little more time to get adjusted. Typically doesn't always translate to great fantasy numbers. How do I view Caleb Williams as a fantasy asset? Again, it's really going to depend on, does he actually go to Chicago? That seems to be everybody's consensus, but it's not 100% guaranteed. But I would really like him as somebody that you could take in late rounds as a quarterback to take a flyer on because he's going to have DJ Moore, and there's a good opportunity that the Bears will take another wide receiver. In Tankathon, they have Rome Odunze, who is the number 1 receiver for Washington, going to Chicago. And if Williams theoretically gets both DJ Moore and Odunze has his 2 weapons, in addition to Cole Kmet, that's a very good offense to build around for the future. So the point is that these 4 teams that I'm talking about first have the most variability of options that they can go out and get one of those elite quarterbacks. Arizona, more than likely not going to do that. Chicago, it seems they're going to do that, but we know for sure that Washington and New England will. Marvin Harrison Jr., I'm going to talk about him briefly. If he does go to Arizona, as I said, I think that he is somebody that you definitely want to be targeting late in the first round. If I had a 1-2 turn pick, I would personally be trying to get him because Arizona, you look at that team, they've got Trey McBride, they've got James Conner, who's going to be getting a little older. Other than that, they really don't have much at wide receiver. So that's an immediate void that he could step into with a quarterback who's arguably a top 12 quarterback in the league already. That's a great situation. So we'll see what happens, but Marvin Harrison could be a very exciting player to look at if he does in fact go to Arizona. Now we'll transition over to the other positions on each team. We'll start with the Chicago Bears. So what I'm going to do is go through all their positions, how they did, what I think is going to happen next year, and if these players are viable assets for the future. So we'll start with Chicago. Their running back core was kind of all over the place this year due to injuries. They had Khalil Herbert primarily as their running back, but he dealt with some injuries earlier in the season. Then it got handed off to Roschon Johnson. He didn't really take advantage, and he also was injured from time to time. So Deontay Foreman, who's a veteran, was in there, got some good games in the middle of the season, but then he got injured. And then Roschon Johnson didn't do anything with opportunities, and then Khalil Herbert came back, and he actually had a pretty good close to the season, finished as a running back 44. He put up double-digit fantasy points in week 16 and 17. I keep getting confused by this week 18. stuck in the past with how the original week format is, I guess. But Khalil Herbert showed some promise. But ultimately, what I think is going to happen with this Chicago Bears team is they're going to look to draft a running back that would probably fit the timeline of Caleb Williams, for example. Get a running back in maybe the middle round, day 2 or 3 pick. And that individual, whoever that will have a great opportunity to step into this backfield and be competitive right away. They could go the free agent route. We have some prolific running backs that are free agents, or at least by name. Derrick Henry, Austin Eckler. Depending on what happens with those guys, they could step into a situation and contribute right away. I don't think the Bears would go after either of those two guys, but it's something to consider because I think this is a backfield that can definitely be upgraded. If I had to pick any of these guys for future value, I'd pick Herbert, but I don't particularly like him as somebody moving forward that you can rely upon. Wide receiver. DJ Moore had an excellent season, finished as the wide receiver 8, put up some monstrous numbers with Justin Fields, and this is impressive considering that Tyson Bagent was his quarterback for a good chunk of the middle of the season, and he had some poor games with Bagent. So Moore is locked in as somebody that is going to be a great wide receiver in fantasy football. Got an argument to be a second round draft pick in redraft leagues. So, and if he gets Caleb Williams, that's going to be a good situation for him too. So DJ Moore is pretty locked in as a fantasy asset for Chicago. I don't really see that changing. And again, if Chicago, their other wide receivers are mostly free agents. Darnell Mooney is a free agent. Believe that Velus Jones is also a free agent. So they've got a lot of guys that are, and a lot of these guys weren't really contributing much in the first place. So they have an obvious need for another receiver to be drafted. And if they get Caleb Williams, number 1, they get Rome Odunze with the 10th pick that they have. That's a pretty good situation for Chicago to be in. We'll wait and see how the picks actually fall, but Moore is locked in, but there is going to be somebody who steps up as that number 2 receiver, whether that be a high draft pick, a lower draft pick, a free agent. Somebody's going to have to step up because they really don't have a great number 2 option past Moore. At tight end, Cole Kmet had a pretty strong season. He's shown up and down games, what he's done mostly throughout his career, but he finished as the tight end 7 on the season. This is pretty good considering, again, a lot of up and down performances. He had some gooses from time to time, but overall finished pretty well and is a tight end that you can generally feel comfortable starting week to week considering the rest of the field relatively. And again, if they upgrade to Caleb Williams, I think that Cole Kmet will have a lot of opportunity again. I need to put a little more time, honestly, into looking at the tight end position for next year. We've got some injuries to TJ Hawkinson, Laporta. Hopefully he's going to be okay. Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce is aging. There's a lot of question marks with tight ends. But Cole Kmet has an argument to be right up in the top 10, possibly top 5, depending on how this offseason goes for Chicago. Their other tight ends, Robert Tonyan and Mercedes Lewis, are free agents. I don't expect them to be contributing if they do come back. I'm not going to talk much about defense and kicker for these teams, but I do want to highlight, unless it's something relevant, but I do want to highlight the defense for Chicago actually played pretty well down the stretch, and I think the addition of Montez Sweat had a lot to do with that. So if they add a couple more defensive pieces, this is a good defense to keep an eye on. There's a lot of things to like about the future of this defense in Chicago, and they could very well be a fantasy asset that you can draft in the later half of the rounds that could give you some good value next season. Depends on what they do, but this is a defense that I'm keeping an eye on for a potential streamer that could become a weekly starter in 2024. Next, we will move on to Washington. And I'm a Washington fan, as you can see. This is my Taylor Heineke shirt from back in, sad to say, the glory days, because we have literally had no glory days for the last 10 years. There's this literally like, I don't want to get too far off track, but like literally what does this team have to look forward to at all in their future? I think that the best case scenario is, whoever they draft, whoever they get as their coach, they've got to hope for a complete turnaround. But like as a Washington Commanders, Washington football team, whatever they call themselves, fan, it's pretty bleak right now. There's almost nothing to root for on this team. But we'll move to their running backs. And Brian Robinson was a lone bright spot on this team. He finished as the running back 22, which is pretty impressive considering the quality of the team around him. He dealt with some injuries from time to time, but he did show some promise. And I think that he's a guy that has a good opportunity to be a contributing running back for this team next year. I have a lot of questions about which of these players are actually going to be solid contributors in 2024 because the coaching staff is going to be replaced. I don't expect Eric Bieniemy will come back either. What are they going to do with their draft? Are they going to bring in another running back? But Brian Robinson has the best opportunity among the running backs on this team currently, to contribute next year with the Washington Commanders. Antonio Gibson, it has a lot of talent, but he's just simply did not get the opportunity under Ron Rivera, has a fumbling problem, and just wasn't getting the snaps. He's an upcoming free agent. I don't see any scenario that he comes back to Washington. But even if he does go to another team, I'm not really sure if there's a good situation for him that he could just step in right away and become a contributing starter. Something to keep an eye on, but I'm not very high on Antonio Gibson's prospects for 2024. Chris Rodriguez came in and showed some promise as well, but he has an opportunity to make a roster spot, but I don't know if that's going to contribute to fantasy production. Got to wait and see, but I suspect that this team is going to bring in somebody to compete in that backfield in the draft. Wide receivers, and this is one of the more disappointing areas on this team, is that you bring in Eric Bieniemy as had a great offense in Kansas City, and you got some great wide receivers like Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson. Curtis Samuel has had some success time to time, but all these guys were extremely disappointing, and none of them were reliable in fantasy. Dotson was a pretty big bust. He had a stretch in the middle of the season where he looked like he had finally turned around, followed it up with a couple goose eggs. He had a goose 2 weeks ago, or I guess 1 week ago. Finished as wide receiver 54. Just very disappointing. I don't know if I can judge him as a bust right now because a lot of this has to do with the coaching. But if he comes back next year, he's going to have an opportunity to turn things around and could be a good sleeper to keep an eye on. McLaurin, kind of the same thing. He's got a little more pedigree, so he'll probably go a little higher in drafts than Dotson will. Not as high as he did this year, but McLaurin, if they get a guy like a Drake May or a Jaden Daniels, I think that he will have a better season, but he doesn't get the volume that you would like from a receiver that's a number one on his team. He doesn't really give you the big explosive plays either. He's more of a guy that he kind of relies on getting a lot of volume from quarterbacks in order to be successful. And if the quarterback just simply isn't getting the ball to him, which could be a concern with the rookie quarterback, he may not be a great fantasy value. So we'll see what happens, but gotta improve a lot of areas on this team before I can feel confident with these wide receivers again. Curtis Samuel is going to be a free agent as well as some other guys on this team like Jamison Crowder, Byron Pringle, but I don't think any of those three are going to be fantasy contributors next year anyway. This is another team that will probably get a wide receiver in the draft. Tight end Logan Thomas actually did pretty well again this season, finished as the tight end 16, but he's 32. A lot of wear and tear for somebody who's been doing it for quite a while, and he's not really giving you the high-end upside that he was in the past. I don't think that he's somebody that you can count on in the future. And that's pretty much all I have to say about Washington. I hope we can turn around, but I don't have a lot of optimism. New England. So next we'll go to the Patriots, and another team that is in desperate need of a quarterback again in 2024. Mac Jones, I just want to talk about him real quick. He has a decent opportunity to be either cut and signed by somebody else or traded to another team and could, step in as a backup that, maybe if injuries happen, maybe he could be a streamer. But I don't think that there's a high probability of something like that happening that will make him become uh, a fantasy relevant player with more opportunity than he would have had this year. Didn't do great with his opportunities, obviously. So, not super high on this idea that you can go after him as a buy low candidate or anything like that. Bailey Zappi's probably not going to have a job next year. Sorry, but just kind of the truth. Um, their running backs are interesting because both Zeke Elliott and Ramondre Stevenson did well when they had volume in certain situations. But Zeke Elliott is an upcoming free agent. Um, Stevenson is still under contract. But until this team improves its line, and we'll see what they do with their coaching, there's questions I have about Stevenson being a good fantasy asset next year as well. Um, in 2022, he had some good PPR points because he was a good pass catching running back. They didn't really look his way as often this time around. We'll see what kind of coaching staff they bring in, what their philosophy is. But Stevenson is somebody that I think is maybe got that people are looking at him a little too optimistically versus what would likely happen is that they're going to bring in another running back. Stevenson will probably be competing for reps. I don't really like this situation as much for him as some others may. Zeke Elliott, we'll see if he retires or not, but he did play well at the end of the season when he was the only back getting opportunities. I think more than likely he's probably going to go on a contending team and may get some second string minutes or is like the backup running back or something like that. I don't see him really ever getting back to that Dallas Cowboys form. Wide receivers. This wide receiver core was brutal for this team. I honestly can't think of any team that was worse than the Patriots. Demario Douglas was the best of the group. He finished as the wide receiver 61. Again, best among the group. But he did get a lot of targets, dealt with some injuries. If they bring in a rookie quarterback and depending on the coaching staff and whatever receivers they bring in, he's got the best opportunity among the receivers there to step in right away. And I think this guy could be a sleeper in redraft formats in this summer because of the fact that people aren't really paying attention to his numbers because he didn't do anything crazy, but he could have the opportunity depending on the system they bring in. Like, let's say they bring in Ben Johnson and they draft Jaden Daniels. That really makes him intriguing as somebody that could, be a light version of Amon-Ra St. Brown potentially. But a lot of ifs in that scenario. The rest of this receiving core, I really do not have any positive outlook on. Devontae Parker on the decline. Juju Smith-Schuster already declined and probably out of a job. Kendrick Bourne looked promising at time, but he is aging, dealt with the season-ending injury. I don't know how he's going to look for next season. And then Tyquan Thornton, again, he's got some juice, but he just doesn't seem to have the opportunity. And he's been a few seasons now. You wonder if it's, maybe he's just not the polished route runner that you need to be an elite wide receiver in the NFL. So, again, another team that's probably going to bring in some more receivers for some competition. But keep an eye out for Douglas because if they don't bring in a lot of receivers, he could immediately step in with a rookie quarterback and be a strong contributor. Tight end, Hunter Henry had a pretty good season for them. He finished as the tight end 17. Not anything special, but relative to the quarterback play, it's solid. He's an upcoming free agent, and I suspect that he's probably going to sign elsewhere. But keep an eye out for where he goes because he could be a sleeper in redraft formats depending on what team takes him in. They also have Gesicki and Pharaoh Brown, who both contributed in some areas from time to time, but just didn't get the volume. Gesicki had been productive in Miami, so he's somebody to look out for that could have some more opportunity in 2024, depending on his situation. Defense could be a sleeper as well. Remember, Matthew Judon injured, Christian Gonzalez injured. Those were their best defensive players. They come back healthy and they bring in some more pieces. It could be a solid defense to stream and potentially start. But at this time, we'll have to wait and see. Arizona. So we'll close out with the Cardinals. Um, James Conner had a very good end to the season, and I think a lot of people may not have been paying attention to that. But if he comes back and has the starting job, he's a very sneaky fantasy asset. If you watch my last video that I just put out last week, I mentioned that there's some running backs that you can get in the 5th, 6th round that could be some good sleepers, and I suspect that's around where James Conner will go. Again, age, questions about like his role on the team with age, stuff like that is going to make him somebody that will slip in draft boards in 2024, but he could be a solid value. And he's just one of those guys that has a nose for getting into the end zone, getting touchdowns. Yes, he is a touchdown dependent player, but he did show a lot of promise late in this season with Kyler Murray as a pass catching running back. And if they don't really get much out at help at the receiving positions, I suspect that won't change. So this is somebody to keep an eye out for. I think he could be a great value, even though he is getting up there in age. DeMercado and Michael Carter both had some good moments from time to time as well when Connor was out. They could have an opportunity to compete for a roster spot on this team next year, but I do think that, again, this is a team that could bring in another running back, challenge Connor, see what happens, but DeMercado and challenge Connor. I think I said Connor. I might have said Carter. But both Michael Carter and Amari DeMercado could be the handcuff next season for Connor, depending on what happens. Wide receiver. This team has a lot of work at wide receiver they need to do, as I've already talked about. Hollywood Brown is the biggest name on this team, but he really disappeared from this offense with Kyler Murray. He's also an upcoming free agent. I doubt he will be back. And if he does go to another team, I'm not sure what his role will be, because this was his best opportunity to be a wide receiver 1 on a team. I think if he goes somewhere else, there's a good probability he's just going to be a wide receiver 3. Other guys, Michael Wilson looked the best among these receivers. He had a good stretch early, middle of the season, and then the last 2 weeks of the fantasy football playoffs in week 16 and 17, he had 15.5 points each in a full PPR format. He gives you a lot of upside as somebody that, again, could be a sleeper for next season in late rounds, but we'll have to wait and see who they bring in. Hopefully it'll be Marvin Harrison, but if not, there's going to be some other guys brought in as well. And then Greg Dortch had a good close to the season. Upcoming free agent, though. We'll see what happens with him. And then Rondale Moore, flashy player, finished as the wide receiver 66, but he doesn't give you consistency, and I really don't like going after guys like that in fantasy football, so not too high on him. Last guy I want to talk about is Trey McBride. Finished as the tight end 8, and keep in mind, beginning of the season, all that was going to Zach Ertz. If Trey McBride had been locked in the whole season with Kyler Murray, he would definitely be a top 5 tight end. He's going to be slept on in draft boards. He's probably going to go somewhere. I don't think he would go any higher than the 5th round. And if he's going to be available in that range for you in the 5th, 6th, 7th round, must add tight end who's going to be involved. I could see this team having a scenario where, again, assuming Marvin Harrison goes there, they're just going to be one wide receiver, Marvin Harrison, and one tight end, McBride, and those are going to be the 2 guys getting targets. It's very possible, and I think that McBride is going to be a sleeper to look out for in 2024. Well, that's all I've got for this video today. In the next video, we're going to be continuing to talk about teams. I'm going to be looking at the teams next that are drafting high but don't necessarily need a quarterback. So we'll get into that list, and then over the next couple of weeks, we'll look at the teams, how they're going to, how I think they're going to project for 2024, and continue to go on up the draft board until we get to whoever wins the Super Bowl. So thank you for watching. And again, I just want to say thank you for everybody that tuned in to the last video. Had a big boom in viewers, and I really like that a lot. So if you had an opportunity to check that out, thank you. And consider subscribing to the channel if you want to see more videos that I make. I don't just make fantasy football, I make some other types of videos as well. So check it out if you're interested for more content. All right, have a good night. See you guys later. Bye.